is the best teacher in politics. And that's what's going to drive them.
Stuart, I'm curious about, you talked about the Republican Party's failure to appeal to black and brown people in America. Let's talk about women for a minute. There are no women candidates for Speaker. And by the way, all of the candidates for Speaker, this is amazing, all of the candidates for Speaker voted against guaranteeing the right of women to birth control. They all voted against reauthorizing the Violence Against Women Act. And they all voted against trying to codify some kind of equality when it comes to wage discrimination based on gender. What is going on in the Republican Party around women? Those three votes are so out of step with America. I bet 90% of America wants to guarantee birth control for women. What is happening on that front in the Republican Party?
Yeah, there's sort of a pattern there, isn't it? You know, I think this is one of the reasons that the Republican Party is drawn to Putin. Look at side of Russia. How many women do you see in power in Russia? As Putin says, there's no gay people in Russia. And there's a sense that this is a world that is changing, that we can stop time, where men, predominantly white men like us, are in power. And we don't want to deal with this changing reality. And, you know, I think it's increasingly unlike America. You end up with, there's 5 senators in the history of America that have been confirmed to the Supreme Court, with senators representing a minority of the country. And all 5 of those are on the court today. And I think that is part of the solution here. You have larger states that are getting larger, and smaller states, by contrast, have the same amount of power in the U.S. Senate, and that creates a disparity. You know, I think there is some hopefulness. I don't think younger voters feel this way. And Joe Biden's best group in 20 were younger voters. And I think when you see how they're turning out, they don't feel this way. And they look at this, and it's just completely out of touch. And it's one of the reasons, if I ran the Democratic Party, I would wake up every day trying to get in a culture war, because they're winning these culture wars. You know, how did it work out when they took on Nike and Colin Kaepernick? Nike made $9 billion. They took on the NASCAR over the Confederate flag. You know, the Republican Party in a culture fight with NASCAR. NASCAR won. It's just a sense that they are not in touch with where America is, and that creates fear. And one thing that Republicans had, we at least like to believe that we had and present, was an optimism, and that you could embrace the future. That there was that we're flawed now, we're all flawed, but there's some sort of sweeping vision that could unite us. And that has been completely lost. And it's an angry party now, and a party of grievance. And there's a limit to how appealing that is.
It really is. The new book is entitled The Conspiracy to End America: 5 Ways My Old Party is Driving Our Democracy to Autocracy. Stuart Stevens, thank you very much. Congratulations on the book. We appreciate your sharing it with us. And coming up, U.S. Capitol Police Officer Harry Dunn is our guest. We'll hear about his fight for the January 6th insurrectionists to be held accountable. Plus, Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich is turning 32 years old this week. He'll be having his birthday inside a Russian prison. His sister will join us in just a few moments to give an update on his condition and how the family is coping. Morning Joe is coming right back.
You know, there's so much stuff right now going on, it's out of line, that I'm like Billy Graham's son, Franklin Graham, that the only thing that's going to straighten this mess out is God and God alone. But the people has to be willing to do that in a very humbling, sincere, honest, true way. And if not, we'll never get out of the storm. If anything, we will just further intensify towards going deeper and deeper into it. It's a heartbreaking scenario on every level, and what you're fixing to see right here pertaining to this police officer of the insurrection that occurred is going to basically speak volumes to that. Please watch as we listen.
Which is $99 at Cardia.com or Amazon.
More and more insurrectionists were pouring into the area by the speaker's lobby near the rotunda, and some wearing MAGA hats and shirts that said Trump 2020. I told them to just leave the Capitol, and in response they yelled, "No, man, this is our house. President Trump invited us here. We're here to stop the steal. Joe Biden is not the president. Nobody voted for Joe Biden." I'm a law enforcement officer, and I do my best to keep politics out of my job. But in this circumstance, I responded. Well, I voted for Joe Biden. Does my vote not count? Am I nobody?
That is Capitol Police Officer Harry Dunn testifying back in the summer of 2021 about his experience on January 6th of that year when rioters stormed the U.S. Capitol attempting to overturn the results of the 2020 presidential election. 2 years after the attack, President Biden honored Dunn's bravery with the Presidential Citizens Medal. Officer Dunn is out now with a new book titled Standing My Ground, a Capitol Police Officer's Fight for Accountability and Good Trouble after January 6th, and he joins us now. Officer Dunn, it's always great to have you with us. Want to get into your book deeply into your account of that day, but you do talk right there in the title about accountability. So I want to ask you about what we've seen in the last couple of months, which is 22-year sentence for the head of the Proud Boys, 18-year sentence for the head of the Oath Keepers, more than 800 people convicted for what they did that day, and more to come who've been charged with crimes. Does that feel like vindication to you?
Morning, Willie. It's always good to talk to you. I won't necessarily say it's vindication, but I struggle with celebrating people being charged and imprisoned. It's a sad moment in our.
In other words, it's bittersweet. In one way, yeah, it feels good, but in another way, it feels really, really wrong because it's really, really out of touch with the normalcies of our politics in today compared to what they should be or was going back 50, 60, 70 years ago.
Country's history, so I don't necessarily know if I can, celebrate or anything like that. All I've ever wanted from the start is accountability for anybody who had anything to do with the failures of that day, whether that be the people who attacked us, whether that be the people who planned it, who empowered it, or anything. But I don't know if I can say it's necessarily vindication. It's a sad day in our country's history.
You write, Officer Dunn, in the book about your decision to go public with your story, not in the book, but way back when you sat down for your first interview or when a reporter reached out to you, as you write in the book, on LinkedIn, and you made a conscious decision. This is probably going to be tough. I'm putting myself out there. I'm exposing myself to these people who clearly are violent and don't care about injuring police officers. Tell our audience about why it was important for you to go public and to tell your story.
I just think it's a continued part of public service. If more people stood up and did what's right, followed their conscience, followed their moral compass, then I think we wouldn't be where we are in this time period in this country. Yes, it is difficult. You open yourself up to a lot of the potential for a lot of attacks physically and on your character. And, I've been fortunate, blessed to not have any physical attacks with me, but there's been some threats and there's definitely been attacks on my character. But
character assassination. But the thing about it is, this just didn't begin in this particular prior presidency. This began back in the late 80s, and now we're seeing the consequences on account of it.
But it's all worth it because at the end of the night, I can sleep well knowing that I'm following my moral compass and I'm doing what I think is right.
Exactly.
And we should note that a part of that following that moral compass is you're still on the job. You're still in there in the U.S. Capitol each and every day. So tell us a little bit about some of the lessons that you hope to impart from this book. What do you want readers, your fellow Americans who have seen the news footage, many of whom have made up their mind long ago what happened on January 6th, some really choosing to downplay what happened. What are you hoping to tell them?
I get asked a lot about how do you still do your job with members of Congress who are denying the election, denying what happened on January 6th. My book isn't really for them. The American people, that's who my book is for. It needs to give an accurate representation and an account of what happened that day. And just my thoughts of where we are in this country and what everybody needs to do. That's why I included the Good Trouble, an ode to John Lewis, in the title, because it's not easy doing what's right, which sounds crazy when you think about it. How it's not easy to do what's right. But my message is to the American people: the most powerful tool you have to protect democracy is your vote. People need to be engaged. People need to be educated about what's going on in this country and not just listen to some sound bites or anything. Do some research, find out what really happened, and then make your decision and vote with your heart, vote with your conscience.
Harry, we are now nearly 3 years from that day, as you described it, that day. You're still going to work nearly every day as a Capitol Police officer. Do you carry any baggage from that day when crowds come into the Capitol these days? Do you think about that day and, your daughter, who was 11 then and is now a little older, she called you that day in the middle of everything? How does this rumble around in your mind?
It's interesting. I used to think of the Capitol. I still do. It was before January 6th. I viewed it as this ultimate pinnacle and symbol of democracy. And, I was so honored to work and protect that building that was built by slaves. So it was such an honor, and I cherished that building, and it was revered. But after January 6th, it became a crime scene and a symbol of one of the darkest days in American history. So walking through that building, I don't necessarily say that I cringe every time I'm there, but there are times when I'm walking through and I just think, I can't believe that happened in this hallowed space.
Yeah.
It is traumatic, but I'm in a good place right now, all things considered. But there are times when you see crowds, but it doesn't deter me from being able to do my job.
There's so much to process. Mike mentioned your 11-year-old daughter at the time, and you write in the book about the moment you were in the middle of defending the Capitol from the rioters when she FaceTimed you, your little girl, and she had no idea what you were experiencing. And you write in part this: I took my jacket sleeve and tried to clean off my face so she wouldn't see me looking all crazy when I turned on my video. I had forgotten that my jacket and most of my clothes were covered with pepper spray and other irritants. I was in pain, but I had to hold it all in and take the call. Hey, baby, I said in my daddy voice as though everything were normal. How are you? She didn't have a clue what was going on. She was telling me a little bit about her day. She was just talking, and she was telling me how she made homemade ice cream. I was screaming inside from the pain, but I had to hold it together for her. That is unbelievable. And I wonder if you could talk more about the trauma that you and many others experienced that still lingers, really, that perhaps needs to be talked about.
Yeah, good morning, Mika. That's one thing that this January 6th has been turned into political talking points. It has been turned into election issues. What people need to realize that day, but there were real victims that day. I still think about Brian Sicknick. I still think about Howie Liebengood, Jeffrey Smith, the officers who fought bravely that day who are no longer with us. In addition to that, I still think about the individuals. The human side of me comes out. I've sat in courtrooms where individuals were sentenced, and you see their family members crying, begging for the judge to have leniency, and that tugs at your heart. Now, I'm not saying that they don't deserve it and they shouldn't be held accountable, but there were real life victims that day. There's a person who was sentenced who may have been their parent's sole caretaker, and now that parent is left to fend for themselves. And like I said, these individuals, I'm not suggesting in any way that we need to not hold them accountable, but they made a conscious decision. But there were real life victims that day, and I think the talking points of January 6th and it becoming an election issue, which sure there are aspects of it, but there were real people's lives that were forever changed that day.
The new book is entitled Standing My Ground, a Capitol Police Officer's Fight for Accountability and Good Trouble After January 6th. Capitol Police Officer Harry Dunn, thank you so much
Thank you
for being on with us this morning and for the book. Thank you.
Thank you.
And coming up, Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich has spent more than 200 days in Russian captivity, accused of espionage, which he, the Journal, and the U.S. government vehemently deny. His family has been fighting for his release from the very beginning. Evan's sister, Danielle Gershkovich, will join us along with the Wall Street Journal's assistant editor. Morning Joe will be right back.
You know, these are real people with real emotions, with real lives, with real love. And to pacify it off in any other form is belittling to humanity. And whenever it comes to sacrificing, I think all of us sacrificed that day in watching just exactly how humiliating it was to watch something like that unfold right in front of national TV, that, as far as I'm concerned, has helped to build the spark of what we're seeing today, either over in Ukraine pertaining to the Russian government, or with what we're seeing over in the Holy Land as far as a major disruption and eruption that's now turning into nothing but a total bloodbath with people basically suffering in such manners that I never would have thought that I would have ever had to have witnessed or seen or heard testimonies of in the 21st century. But now now it's all coming home, pertaining to one little spark can sometimes turn into a great big flame. Where do I think the little spark come from pertaining to basically public disobediences? I think it come from Chicago myself. I think it come from Jerry Springer. Whenever the Jerry Springer show was coming on TV and everybody took a liking to it, I knew then that not only had people's appetites changed that was producing the show, especially with it being a live show, but I knew then that our American appetites had changed pertaining to watching people basically their lives get ruined right in front of everybody else, and why people was applauding and clapping and hooraying of what was going on. There was another show out there that come close to that, pertaining to people being accused of basically parenthood, of women that got victimized towards being pregnant. But they usually try to maintain their show more on a orderly form. But the Jerry Springer show, I mean, it just really went way out there. And to think that that man is worth millions of dollars today because of the damage that he has done to our great nation, pretty well speaks volumes about what type of people that we have become. Especially whenever you take one little spark that turns into another bigger spark pertaining to the Waco Mount Carmel incident 2 years prior, of the Oklahoma incident, then the 9/11 incident, and then the COVID, which we really, us Americans, I don't think none of us had any control over, but it was a man-made disease. But that spark initiated the January 6th spark, along with all the other sparks that initiated the Ukraine spark, that now has initiated the Middle East spark. So all these little sparks have now come into play of where we are today in being a great big huge spark. And whenever I say a great big huge spark, I'm not even remotely saying that January the 6th or any of those other events that happened in Oklahoma our 9/11. I'm not saying that none of those events was little bitty, minute, finite occurrences, because they was big. They was really, really big. But out of those occurrences, people never truly awakened. I mean, even 9/11 was very, very short-lived. It may have hung around for maybe a year or two. People at first went to churches, but bought a lot of guns and stuff. They become unified, but then after that, it broke apart. And that's what they're hoping it's going to happen over in the Middle East right now. They're hoping that if they buy out enough time, eventually people will lose their momentum in what actually needs to be done to evil over in that area. That's all they're doing. They're playing on people's emotion towards time is the healer of all things, and they think that if they play it out long enough pertaining to time, that eventually the lukewarm people will say, well, it's only going to make matters worse. Let's just forget about all this and try to get over it, and let's go on about our business. Well, I got news for you. There are certain people that will not never get over some of the stuff that has happened to them just within my lifetime. Never. Regardless whether it be the Kennedys, or the people in Mount Carmel, or the people in Oklahoma, or the people in 9/11, or the people that has died, or family members that has died pertaining to COVID, the people that's dying right now presently over in Ukraine because of a bully, because of irresponsible, evil, demonic people that needs to be put in their place pertaining to the Russian government. And now we're dealing with what we're dealing with the insurrection, as well as the Middle East. Every one of these issues
Visited the reporter and
have put us where we are today. So I want history to know that and to note that.
Court upheld an extension of Gershovich's pretrial detention. It was supposed to expire in May, but will now continue through November 30th. Gershovich was arrested in March on allegations of espionage. Both he and his employer have denied the claims, and the U.S. government has declared him to be wrongfully detained. Joining us now, Evan's sister Danielle Gershovich and Wall Street Journal's assistant editor Paul Beckett. Thank you both very much for coming on the show this morning. Danielle, it's always hard to find the right words and to be validating in a question about a situation like this with your brother, but how are you doing? How are you being forced to cope in this situation, and what do you know about your brother's condition?
I'm sure you can imagine it hasn't been easy for any of us, but Evan is doing amazing. I look up to him so much, and he works very hard to keep his spirits up. He does what he can, writing. We write letters to each other to stay positive and focused, and that's so inspiring for my parents and I. So we really are able to stay strong to seeing him.
And how much contact? You say you write letters. Are you able to communicate with him?
Yes, we write letters about once a week, and I summarize everything going on with their family, daily life. I try to make him smile. So we do a lot of jokes, a lot of sibling kind of jokes.
And the impact on the entire family must be indescribable. Is it Evan who drives you all to continue to function? It's got to be so hard.
Evan has always been an emotional center in our family, and so it's really hard without him. But we had to step up and be that for him. So I'm really proud of us that despite the circumstances, I think we're all holding on, and it's really a testament to how amazing and courageous Evan is.
Danielle, good morning. Thanks so much for being with us. We're grateful for you to come on and share your story. I'm curious listening to you talk about writing letters back and forth with your brother. I was going to ask you how you're communicating, how often you hear from him, and does he give you a sense of how he's being treated? Is he allowed to describe how he's being treated there?
I'm sure you can understand. I can't get too much into the details about that, but I know that he's doing his best to eat well, stay healthy. He meditates, he writes a lot, he's reading at a breakneck pace. That's very impressive. And I really enjoy writing letters to him, receiving them. I get to hear his voice in my head. And it's like we're talking together. So that keeps us all going.
He's an extraordinary guy. And Paul, from your side of it at the Journal, what are you hearing, and what are negotiations, to the extent you can tell us even, negotiations like to get him back through the State Department? And do you have any contact with the Russians themselves?
We have seen now over the months, various statements from each side saying serious about talks or the prospect of a prisoner swap or things like that. We would like to see more action, to be honest. We just feel that it's so outrageous that Evan has been jailed on these false charges that I think it's incumbent on the U.S. government to deal with the Russians in a way that will bring him back to the family and back to the newsroom. Ultimately, it will be a government-to-government negotiation that solves this, so we'd like to see that happen sooner rather than later, obviously.
Paul, in the case of Brittany Griner, the Russians were adamant that they wanted the trial process to go through and to have some kind of verdict, so that they could say, look, we did due process, and then she was released a few months after that. Is it your understanding that that's what, if there is going to be any timetable around some kind of swap or some kind of deal, is it your understanding that the trial would have to take place first and have a verdict as well in Evan's case?
That may be the case. That's one way in which this could be solved, and the Russians can keep him in pretrial detention up to 1 year. So, as you mentioned earlier, the latest extension was to November 30th. It wouldn't surprise us if that was extended through to March. At some point, they have to produce some evidence, whatever evidence they claim to have, at trial. So it's possible, and the Russians have said before, that if it's going to be a prisoner swap, it would have to come after trial. But we remain hopeful that it wouldn't need to get that far, and that the U.S. government could find a way to bring him home well before that.
All right, our thanks to Danielle Gerskovich, an assistant editor for the Wall Street Journal, Paul Beckett. Thank you both very much for coming on this morning. We appreciate it. And Jonathan Lemire, what have you heard from the White House about the efforts to get Evan home?
Well, this is a subject, any sort of prisoner situation, the White House does not like to say much publicly. They don't want to, of course, endanger anything going on, but there have been off and on talks. We do know that from administration officials. Since Evan was imprisoned wrongly. We know from the State Department that these bogus charges, there's nothing to them. We know that the president has signaled that he'd be willing to entertain a prisoner swap to get Evan home, but it's not quite clear what the Russians would want in return. The one name that had been floated out there is someone the U.S. does not even hold. He's in German custody. It's not clear whether that kind of arrangement could be made. But even as the Ukraine-Russia conflict slips from the headlines a little bit here, with so much focus on the Middle East and indeed the hostages currently being held in Gaza, I'm assured by U.S. officials that they have certainly still efforting here to bring Evan home, and we certainly send our thoughts to his family. This is his birthday week. His family is doing as much press as they can to make sure that his situation is not forgotten.
Turning 32. All right, still ahead, we have continuing coverage of the Israel-Hamas war. NBC's Richard Engel will bring us the latest from Jerusalem. Also ahead, Donald Trump's bizarre comments yesterday from the campaign trail. He compared himself to a Nobel Peace Prize winner and told his supporters they don't need to vote on Election Day. That's all ahead on Morning Joe.
Confused by the Medicare ABCs? If you have Original Medicare, then you have Parts A and B.
Now, does that sound like a growing, aggressive, maturing democracy? Whenever you have a prior president that's going to make a statement like that to supposedly his viewers or his supporters? Not even close. Not even close. So in ways, whenever whenever these communism authoritarians speak out and say that democracy is a failure, I can see where their case, where they base their principles off of their case, because in a way, they're right. Our democracy, as we know it today, in compared to how the democracies was run in other eras, is totally in left field, to the degree that I don't even know that this would even be thrown out there as a humorous suggestion from the party going back 50, 60, 70 years ago, much less saying it and accepting it by that party. I can't get over how far in left field that either party. I could go on and on and on for days about how that the people have not gotten the better bang for the buck whenever it comes to whenever it comes to seeing how many mistakes not only have been made, but how many mistakes are presently still being made. So in a way, whenever these communist-controlled authoritarians bash democracy because of the mess that we have made over here in America, and I'm not saying it's this way in all the other democracies, but I am saying that because of the mess that we have made over here, I can understand the reason why that they say what they say, that democracy is a failure. Our original forefathers are presently rolling around in their graves, and have been now for several years, for the past 30 plus years, whenever it became obvious in the movement that occurred during the latter part of Ronald Reagan's administration, especially with the so-called corporate churches here in America that said one thing, but in reality done something completely, totally different. And my case, pertaining to the things that I have went through, the founder of the ministry here at 291 Thompson Road, Sharon, Tennessee, zip code 38255, is proof in the pudding in response towards how that the church community never truly wanted authentic, godly peace. They went along with certain politicians in a pretend, abstract, conformed, deformed, perverted peace that has gotten us where we are today. And my friends, that is the gospel, if there ever has been the gospel, that once more I can authentically prove either on paper or in digital form in what has occurred in the past lifespan of the Windmill Ministries missions. And I'm really thankful that my son is finally coming around and understanding that the things that his dad was involved in was not just
more than $1 billion in damages to families affected by the Sandy Hook Elementary School massacre in Connecticut, despite the fact that he filed for bankruptcy. Jones filed for Chapter 11 protection last year after he was ordered to pay compensatory and punitive damages for repeatedly defaming the families by claiming for years that the 2012 killings of 20 students and 6 staff members was a hoax. However, the judge ruled that such protections do not apply over findings of willful and malicious conduct. An attorney for Jones did not immediately return a message for comment. In a video posted online, Jones claimed that he was in debt and would continue to appeal the verdicts. Former Maryland Governor Larry Hogan is withdrawing from Harvard fellowships following the university's response to the Hamas terror attacks. Hogan sent a letter to Harvard's president yesterday, writing that he cannot condone the dangerous anti-Semitism that has taken root on the campus. The university's president has been heavily criticized for failing to call the attacks terrorism in her initial public statement. It came after several student organizations signed a letter blaming Israel's government for the violence.
My God.
And up next, we'll hear from one of the two hostages released by Hamas yesterday as she shares details of her captivity. Plus, in just over an hour, House Republicans will vote again for who will be the party as their next speaker nominee. It comes 3 weeks to the day of there being no leader for the lower chamber of Congress. We're back in 2 minutes.
Do you not think that other governments all over the world, regardless whether they be Democrat or communism, are sitting back and watching all of this and taking all this in as a form of chaotic weaknesses? Sure they are. Sure they are. They see the impending doom that various politicians have brought forth for the citizens of America. So, in a way, does really America, our government, really have any, do they really have any type of right in diminishing or criticizing these communist countries in the way that they're conducting themselves with their citizens? Do we really have a right in seeing how that we have been failed here as Americans? We cannot even unite. You know, the only thing that united people with Donald Trump was money. Power. It was a statute that people was striving towards, and you know, if the truth be known, the insurrection probably needed to be done, okay? And I want the record to show this, that it probably needed to be done, but it was done prematurely. It was done incorrectly. It was done by the hand of barbarians, in a way, towards thinking that they was going to be able to go in and force the will of the people in another direction. That's not how you get the bad out in a democracy. The way you get the bad out in a democracy is everybody sticking together and putting these people in their place. Get them out of offices and put people in offices that can accommodate the needs and the will of the people. And I'm not a politician, and I don't want to be a politician. But for some reason, because of biblical Bible prophecy and what has occurred going back 30 plus years ago, I really don't have a choice other than to voice my opinion about certain aspects about politics here, not only in America, but globally, worldwide. In other words, this is another consequence in being forced to have to dibble-dabble around in areas that I shouldn't be having to dibble-dabble around in. And if the truth be known, I probably shouldn't have never had to have dibble-dabbled around in areas out west pertaining to Waco, Mount Carmel, as that was tied into the Oklahoma bombing.
BBC News, Caddy K.
I should not never have had to have done that. Just like I'm fixing to show you just in a minute towards another chapter in my life that I'm having to be engulfed in, that I should not have to be engulfed in right now.
Healthy margin in 2023.
6 of 8. Okay, healthy margin.
We thank God for tender mercies. But speaking of thankfulness, 2 more hostages released yesterday. Of course, so many still held. Axios reporting this morning that Israel is willing.
That is just a tinderbox over there, just waiting to just explode in such of a backfiring, demonic, cruel way that I can't even begin to express my heart's content and my grief that goes out to all these people that have been subjected to this type of misery and to this type of pain due to the fact of what even Putin said a few days ago, that it's the Western world's fault pertaining to our politicians that once more wanted to go into this thing in a phony, fake way. And I've said this before, using the illustrations of Jesus Christ, that Christ said, you do not try to clean the cup from the outside in, but rather from the inside out. And whenever you're trying to conform the devil and the devil's people, you have to first recognize that these are people that are unreformable. They're unreformable. And until the strength of goodness overpowers the strength of badness, or madness, whichever way you want to look at it, bad or mad, just like the leader of the NRA that said the only way to defeat a bad person with a gun is with a good person with a gun. And until we recognize that, either as political parties or as a Christian party, we will never grasp that in which what we're actually fighting up against. Matter of fact, my son sent me a link, and once more I want to thank my son because he has come to the realization of understanding that his dad was not mad pertaining to me being a lunatic about all this about biblical Bible prophecies, especially since what has just unleashed over in the Middle East pertaining to seeing the involvement. As a matter of fact, he sent me 2 links yesterday or last night sometimes, and both links was pertaining to the Middle East, and one link out of the 2 was directly with the devil's people over in Saudi Arabia towards the Saudi prince over there, or king over there, basically having this ideology that he's going to come up with this fancy digital internet service that's just going to be absolutely overwhelming for people to jump on board and to be a part of. That, my friends, is nothing more or less than biblical Bible prophecy coming true towards the leadership of somebody coming in power that's going to force his way into this powerful entity of forcing people to take the mark of the beast 666. These are all steps that are being precisely taken right now, that various people are a part of, that not only the political parties here in America either aren't aware of or aren't capable of understanding, incapable of understanding that these things are all in play, or the Christian society is overlooking it towards thinking that it's just a fad, a fly-by-night thing, here today and gone tomorrow. I got news for you. The patterns that have been projected now for the past 30 plus years have been all patterns of defeat, patterns of misery, patterns of sorrow. And those are the patterns that our enemies today are willing to inflict upon to the American people at the expense of sacrificing themselves. And until we understand that and grasp that on the level that it needs to be grasped in, we're only going to be just like the dog chasing after its tail that's moving, but in actuality is not going nowhere. This is the afterburner of the facts of what has occurred, that now people are beginning to awaken towards just exactly how big that the resistance movement that began in the late 80s and through the 90s pertaining to biblical Bible prophecy that is now starting to slap people in the face pertaining to reality. And we have no one to blame but those that was in power that thought that they could do these things and obviously get away with it.
But at the end of the day, they had no plan. They had no plan. And Larry, this could stretch out another 2 or 3 weeks. This is unfortunate, and I'm ashamed that we're in this position. Hopefully, we'll find someone that can get 217 votes soon.
I don't think they know what shame is. It's kind of like those 2 adjusters that I was working with in Charlotte, North Carolina at the time whenever a catastrophe hit, and everybody was basically being money hungry, and it was just a total chaotic situation for the first 2 or 3 weeks. And one estimator looked at the other estimator and said, well, you hurt my feelings. And the other estimator looked at that guy and said, well, you got to have feelings to hurt first before you can hurt somebody's feelings. It's the same way with our political stance today over here in America. Shame? Do you really know what shame is? Whenever it comes to the integrity of we the people? You got to have feelings to hurt before you can hurt somebody's feelings. And today, I'm not going to say that they're the walking dead, but even Jesus announced or pronounced certain people that basically was the walking dead in the degree of saying, let the dead bury the dead. He was talking about people that was dead in reality, people that was dead whenever it comes to what they're facing, people that was dead in the Lord, people that was dead spiritually, people that was dead consciously. He was talking about all the above. Let the dead bury the dead. So there's been dead people, walking dead people, I guess ever since the beginning of time. In some form or fashion, in some culture or generation or the other. There's been walking dead people. These are the things that the Bible explicitly talks about that's going to happen in the last days, pertaining to them being in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are nothing more than our enemies. They are nothing more than raging, ravening wolves, is what the Lord said that will occur in the last days. And man, are we ever seeing that. And I tend to wonder if somebody over there in Russia, long about the time before President Gorbachev, long about Brezhnev's era, seeing that in the American people, and seeing our laws and seeing how that we was basically getting off base with our morals ever since the assassination of Kennedy. And that's whenever they made the announcement that we will take the American people over and never fire a shot. In other words, we'll sit back long term. This will be a long-term plan. We'll sit back and basically let them destroy themselves. And it was the very thing that one of our founders, Abraham Lincoln, said specifically, that the only entity that will destroy America is the entity from within, of us destroying ourselves. And that's basically what has occurred in the past 30 plus years. And if you don't believe me, all you got to do is analyze my testimony of my life, of everything that has occurred towards people being basically non-compliant, non-supportive, people basically being against anti-Juby in the effect of me preaching and teaching and telling them all the things that I've been telling them about, even though every time I tell them something that's going to occur, it occurs. It occurs, regardless whether it's the Mississippi River getting record lows again this year, or telling people that it was Biden that won the presidency versus Trump, or other prophecies that I have given, a bloody road ahead, major electrical disturbances to come, etc., etc., etc. Every time I put out an advisory, it comes true. But yet no, I don't have no supporters. But yet no, I don't have no congregation. I'm not looking for sympathizers. I'm not looking for sympathizers. Even Jesus said, weep not for me, but weep for your children and your children's children. Especially after whenever he went up into the mountain and said, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, for I've gathered thee together as a hen would gather her chicks, and you would not listen. Jesus knew at that point in time, regardless whether it was a down moment or whatever you want to call it, negative moment in the lifespan of Jesus' ministry, he knew that he was not going to be able to conform the people in that area. There was only certain people that was touched by God that seen God's Son doing what God's Son done. And even Jesus asked them, how do you know this? How do you know these things? And Jesus, after some of his disciples would respond, he would say, not by flesh and blood, but by the Spirit alone that has quickened your mind and quickened your consciousness of the reason why that you know these things. In other words, it wasn't something that somebody told you. It wasn't something that you actually visually seen. It wasn't something that you actually heard, but it was the Spirit of God that penetrated into your spirit and convinced you that the Lord was who the Lord truly was. And until, I guess, the American people go down this onslaught of suffering, there's really not going to be no way of awakening these people, because obviously they are so deceived and brainwashed that the inedible is going to have to take place. And it's going in levels. Each step gets a little worse. Each level gets a little worse. Each category gets a little worse, a little worse, a little worse. So, I tend to wonder who's next and what's next. I think Hillary Clinton said, well, who's next? Whenever the falling of 2008 of the real estate market that bursted, that caused the banks to have to be bailed out, and General Motors and Ford, and I think one of the other car manufacturers, and it was just an onslaught of loss during that time. That about a year later, our Congress passed laws that they would never ever do that again, and I'll be darned, this year, I think it was this year, after the presidency in America realized what kind of trouble that various lending institutions was in, done the very opposite of what Congress had told them not to do by reversing the law and basically bailing out these bigger institutions, all on the backs of the American tax-paying people. When are the American people going to awaken? And if they do awaken, are they going to awaken entirely too late? Because the ship, my friends, is just at the brink of plummeting completely under the water. Right now, it's probably about 80%, 85% on its way towards going completely down. And I'm still not seeing good-minded, smart people that's bailing out the water that's already got in the ship, much less figuring out how to patch up the holes to prevent more water from getting into the boat. We're still heading down. The trajectory that we're on is still a downward trajectory. And if you don't believe me, turn on the news and start looking at what's going on right now in the Middle East. And whenever you put two and two together pertaining to the Saudi Arabian government over there, that's all of a sudden come out with this ideal that they're going to have something that's going to be more sweeter than candy that everybody's going to attach to, pertaining to this new system that they have come on board with. I guarantee you, whatever that they're talking about the opening phases of the new world order, the mark of the beast, 666. And if the Christian society that claims to be the Christian society are still walking around in limbo, it only speaks volumes about the people that are walking around in limbo, much less the people that has caused this limbo to come upon to we the people to begin with.
Now, I gotta say, Willie,
That's experience and insight.
If James Comer's saying it's a dumb move,
yeah,
like he trademarked dumb move.
Mm-hmm. Got patent.
And he's talking about a patent, I guess, on dumb moves.
You can literally scan it.
I mean, it's just such a mess, isn't it?
It is. I like how he also said, I like 6 of the 8. He did some quick math in his head, had 2 names in mind that he couldn't even bring himself to give false praise, faint praise upon. Yeah, I mean, to say this is a mess is an understatement. I mean, we've been over 2 weeks now without a Speaker of the House with important business in front of us. And now, so at 9 o'clock this morning, short time from now, Republicans are going to have...
It's so much of it going on, I'm tending to wonder if it's not being done intentionally or consciously. I know it's being done subconsciously. You know, a lot of times people say things and do things, subconsciously speaking, that they really are not in control of their own actions or their own emotions, because they allow for that particular entity to take them over, and the next thing you know, they either say or do the wrong thing. And after it's all said and done with, a lot of them wind up in prison because of it, and they're questioning themselves, what in the heck got into me towards me doing what I done? How in the world did I ever reach that level of me doing what I done? Well, you know how? Because they was following after the wrong submission, and they was actually being submissive to the devil rather than being submissive to the teachings of the Lord Jesus Christ. And that's what we're seeing right now over there in the Middle East. And as far as I'm concerned, the majority of them, you can take them and put them all in a paper sack, the way that my grandfather used to always say, shake them up and roll them out, and they're all going to be identically the same, because they're all in the same category of being evilly minded, motivated people. And I'm not necessarily saying this about Jerusalem, because I think Jerusalem has really been over backwards for the past 20 plus years, and them compromising the way that they have compromised. But once more, this should be proof in the pudding that you cannot compromise with the devil and the devil's people. It won't work. That's like the judges over here that continually keep basically not punishing the people that they should be punishing, and now it's turned into nothing but an evolving door. They're out, they're in, they're out, they're in, they're in, they're out, they're in, they're out. It's proof in the pudding that what you are doing is a failure whenever it comes to compromising with evil. You cannot compromise with evil. Dick Cheney had it right in word form, even though deed form they was way off target pertaining to the Bush administration, but to go up against the very axis of evil in cutting off the head of evil. That's the only way that you're going to be able to prove to evil that we don't have to take what you're dishing out. We don't have to take what you're dishing out. And I'm just so thankful that I have lived through this last battle that costed me a sibling, my younger brother. But I'm so glad that I have lived through it to the degree that now I can talk about it and tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth. So help me God, in how the court system in Weakley County failed David Jeffrey Jackson. And I think if anybody pulls the records and starts looking at the facts between 2014 and 2017 from the time he actually died, anybody that's got a decent opinion about themselves are going to look at those records and say, you know what? This man's case that he's making against the courts here in Weakley County is on target, is on the money. What do you have to say about this, Tommy Moore, Judge Pence? What do you have to say about this, Johnson, Tommy Thomas? What do you have to say about this, Mike Wilson, and all of his administrating clonies that he basically got bought into year after year after year? You do not become sheriff 9 terms unless you have bought off the people that's putting you in power towards them being your clonies. And that's exactly what Mike Wilson done. And Mike Wilson thinks that he ain't going to give an account for these things. Tommy Moore thinks that they ain't going to give an account for these things. The people right here in arms throwing distance thinks that they're not going to give an account for these things. That's the part that's radicalized to me, is that they have been captured, caught, red-handed, and they're still not willing to do the right thing about it. Regardless whether it be Kentucky, Tennessee, or Oklahoma. The thing about Kentucky never would have done what Kentucky done if Tennessee hadn't done what they done. The thing about it is, Oklahoma never would have done what they done if Tennessee and Kentucky didn't do what they done. Once more, you start a match, it's like a snowball, and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And that's what's going on right now in global world affairs, that now we're seeing things unfolding and happening all over the world, regardless whether it be the forces of nature or the forces of mankind, that are all leading in the trajectory of great tribulation. Not a formal part of tribulation, not a bad time for that particular culture or history in that era, but the great tribulation. And whenever that happens, my friends, you will know. You will know the difference between the works of the devil versus the works of God. Whenever God decides to bring the wrath down upon to the will of the people, and he basically comes back in flaming fire, taking vengeance upon them who know not God and upon them who obey not the gospel, you will know the difference. Because every structure that is burnable upon all 7 continents will be burnt down to the ground. And those who are left here will have to learn their lessons in a completely different format. Because at that time, it will be total chaos, and there will be so many people that will be angry at God himself that will basically create their own God. And this is whenever the opening of the 3rd and the 4th horseman, or the 3rd and 4th seal, pertaining to the false prophet and the Antichrist. And this will actually be whenever the mark of the beast, the number 666, will come into play, to the point that, just like the Bible predicts, that if you do not participate in this system, you will either starve to death, or in some cases, probably a lot of cases, you will actually be put to death. And I know that the average person that listens to this, that has not had an awareness of the supernatural and has not been briefed pertaining to predictions out of the Bible, they're probably going to listen to some of my stuff that I'm talking about right now and think that this guy has really lost his marbles. That this guy that's talking about all this stuff is off his rocker. Well, that's exactly what they thought 40 plus years ago whenever I went to Kenton, Tennessee, and Damian Cross listened to what I was talking about and basically sided with the devil and the devil's people that said, you know what, Dennis, you got a problem. We think that you got a problem pertaining to talking about all this stuff. And because of it, we're asking for you to go and be admitted into a mental institution. And if you don't go voluntarily, we will force you to go involuntarily. We will perceive you as you being a threat to society or a threat to yourself, to the degree that we will intervene.
For the speakership,
we will intervene in your life, and we will brand you regardless whether you like it or not. That's what my hometown in Kenton, Tennessee done to me 40 plus years ago. And if the person that should have been marked towards being a danger was the very person that was promoting all this to begin with, that began with some talk show host, and I forgot his name now, pertaining to some whacked out doctor talking about lithium on TV. And I'm not saying that there's not people out there that's chemically imbalanced that need some sort of medication, because I know that they do. But also know this: if you dig into the fundamentals pertaining to psychiatric hospitals and psychiatric methods, it actually goes back into witchcraft towards controlling people with the methods of chemicals. Now, in the 21st century, we really don't have no other choice but to control these people with some form of harsh chemical, because if we didn't, they would sure enough be a danger either to themselves or to the open population. What has done all this? What has done all this? A rebellion. A rebellion that didn't just begin during the era that they're talking about, which with January the 6th pertaining to the insurrection, but a rebellion that has now gotten the attention of our American politicians that cannot even elect a speaker. That way the system will function the way that the system is halfway supposed to function. But they can't even put that in power right now. They can't even put that in place. So basically, proof is in the pudding towards the failure of, yes, our American democracy. Now you can say, well, that's a very shameful thing for you to say that, Dennis, about your own country. It may be, and I don't want to say it, and I'm not proud to have to say it, but I'm saying it because it's the truth. Whenever you have a group of people that has voted again and again and again and taken up this much time and this much effort of the American tax-paying people's, basically their needs, and you still can't get nothing done up in the White House pertaining to all this, proof is in the pudding, my friends. You can't deny it. You can't spell it in any other way than what it already has presented itself towards. And we have seen this again and again and again. And to be quite honest with you, I truly believe that the American people are tired of it. I want to show you real quick in what I was talking about out here. I've been forced at the age of 62, basically being denied the right or access of having the influences to be able to help people towards a group of people that wanted to demonize me and dehumanize me the way that they did. But I've been forced to have to build a wheelchair ramp because as of yesterday, I went to the doctor's office and they're still on the go pertaining to me having a left ankle fissure. This particular ramp right here, I've just started it. I haven't finished it. I got a lift right here pertaining to this whole system right here being able to raise up and be equal to the door right there. But I want to come back here and show you in response to all of this of what I have accomplished right here. I had to restabilize this right here because it was kind of loose, just basically bricks that made a step. So I had to pour that with concrete. My worker and I did. I thought we'd done a pretty decent job there on that real quick. But about the only thing that I like out here on this project pertaining to my wheelchair ramp going into my second trailer is I was going to take paint, regular paint, and probably had to paint 2 or 3 coats of it and get it real sticky and take some sand and spread all over the wet paint to give some sort of a grip. That way I didn't have to worry about losing my grip of either going in or out, either on a wheelchair or crutches or a walker. So instead of going with the paint and sand, I decided to go with shingles. This is just your standard shingle right here, okay? And if you look right there, I got about 4 inches on that side and about 4 inches on this side. So instead of me having to paint all of it, all I have to do is put paint on this side, put paint on that side, and then I bought a roll of tar paper right here. You put your tar paper down first below the shingles, and then you put the shingles on top of that. And I feel like by doing that, it will preserve the planks that hadn't been painted, so I won't have to spend so much money and time on painting all of it. And also it will allow to have grip to where whenever I'm coming in or out, I'll come near of not losing my grip in response to this wheelchair ramp. I've never built a wheelchair ramp. These are the original steps that we built right here. Step 1, step 2, step 3, until you got up to the deck, which is a fairly high deck because of the way the trailer is setting, okay? But we widened the steps enough that I can still get up and down right here. What I done right here was smooth some of this off. I cut some of this off, probably about 1 inch off right here. Couldn't cut off much more than 1 inch because it was already getting close to the post. but I cut that off. I narrowed it up until that right there. Then once I got up to that point right there, I didn't have to narrow it no more. But I narrowed that to give it more space between here and here. That way, somebody like me with a wide, you know what, could still get up and down in there without having to dismantle all of this once I heal up, providing that it's in the cards for me to heal up. I'm sure that there's a lot of people right here within arm's throwing distance that hopes that this will be my last endeavor. They wish nothing but doom and gloom upon to my life. They are hoping that I would suddenly die and just go away. Now they'll tell you otherwise. Oh no, we don't wish that upon Juby. The courts up here in Weakley County and the probation officers, we don't wish such stuff like that upon any of our citizens. They're lying. Because I guarantee you, there's many of citizens in this county that they wish would either go away, move off, or die. Because these people have been a thorn in their sides. And some of them was warranted towards the authorities having to do what they've done to them because of drugs or because of hard-headedness or because of the devil himself. But there's a lot of people in this county, in Weakley County, Tennessee, that have been abused by the system, just like myself. After pouring this concrete, basically base right here, that way, if I am in a wheelchair, I'll have room to turn around without it being in mud. I had to go back and lift part of this up right here on this end right here, and go in and be sure and took Quikrete and made it level with this pad before I done all this right here, done all this work. And the reason being is because if you'll look at the setting, the way this is right here, this is my grandfather's exact measurements of what their two-story house was before it burnt down. But if you'll look at the setting, I get all the water coming off of the water coming down here, which is, I don't know how many square foot. Then I get all the water that's coming off of the trailer right there that's coming down here. And whenever it's a hard, intense rain, I guarantee you, this will be almost like a river right here. So I had to be sure that I got this pretty well accurate because it actually goes downhill. But even with it going downhill, I still had to go in and trench it this way, trench it that way, and then I trenched it off that way, back over here. In spots right over there, it probably got down almost a foot deep. But then I took concrete and I poured in the bottom of the valley of the trench before I covered the trench back up. Just a small amount, just enough to harden. And then I took these red rocks right here and I placed them probably about every 2 to 3 inches apart. I placed those rocks while the concrete was still wet in the trench, and I pushed them down into the concrete a little bit. Then I put rye seeds down to be able to, so it will come up in the fall and the winter time and still gain some sort of a rooting pertaining to it having something to not just wash away. And then I covered it up, and then I put some more seed on it and done it that way, which will kind of be like it'll work in a sense towards like an underground covert, to where whenever the water that's generated from here, if it don't go completely over the yard that way, what does seep down into this area will eventually go down that way. And the reason why I put the rock in the concrete while the concrete was still wet, that way if it did get serious enough with a major flood, it wouldn't wash the rock away along with the concrete. I know the concrete ain't going to be washed away because, you know, it's probably about 2 inches thick. Once more, starting right there at that end, going down this way, and then going down all the way down this way, okay? Following the baseline with the slope of the angle of the hill. So you may be asking, what was you going to tell us pertaining to all this, other than you showing us what you have done out here? This right here should not have never have to have been done in my lifespan. You know why? Because in my lifespan, I should have already been taken up and rewarded in my Heavenly Father's kingdom, pertaining to Him saving my life the way that He did in 1983. And just as of this year alone, my life was spared again, pertaining to me almost drowning, while a group of people basically sat and watched me struggling for my life and didn't even have the gall to throwing out some sort of a life preserver. Of course, I realized that the people that I was dealing with at the time, their elevators ordinarily didn't go all the way to the top, and because of it, I'm not going to hold them people responsible or accountable for what occurred, even though I probably could have had, but I'm not, because I realize that it was a force or entity that happened that really and truly was not their fault. And I'm not the type of person that's going to blame people for stuff that isn't other people's fault. But what's happening right now to America, okay, in all this violence and what we're seeing with Ukraine, what we're seeing in the Middle East, what we're seeing on our own streets here in America, there's certain people, especially the elders, the baby boomers, that they're going to be held accountable for this stuff, regardless whether they like it or not, because they have allowed for this stuff to fester and to grow and to intensify the way that it has in the past 30 some odd years. And we're talking about people that claim to have some sort of religious experience with God. Now, I'm going to go ahead and say this in response towards me saying that I shouldn't be in the spot that I'm in right now because of the delayment of people trying to go up against biblical Bible prophecy. But whenever I first moved here, there was absolutely nothing here except the old trailer that was in back that Danny was living in. That's parked right there where my trailer is now, my older brother. But there was a concrete slab here, but other than that, it was just bare ground. There wasn't no building here. This wasn't here. This wasn't here. Flags wasn't here. Okay? The cross that's attached to the building wasn't here. And basically, whenever I come back, I didn't know that I was going to be coming back to World War III, pertaining to the ownership of the property of the people that own this corner lot right here, that had some renters over here that was part of the movement towards wanting to destroy my life, towards either running me off or provoking me to the extent that I wound up taking the law into my own hands, which would have basically been a suicide act towards shooting myself in the foot. And that's exactly what certain individuals wanted, and that's exactly what they did not get. So as far as I'm concerned, including the law in this area, you have failed in your attempts towards wanting to destroy God and God's people. Now, you can go to church all you want, and you can put on a false face all you want. But the bottom line is this: you did not support the Windmill Ministries missions whenever you had an opportunity to support me. You was looking at the latter part of the prophecy rather than the first part of the prophecy, because the only way to be able to take peace from the planet Earth is that you got to have peace upon the earth to take. Since this anointing fell upon my life in 1988 that helps to validate everything that's went on. Since this has happened, America especially has gone in just the opposite direction towards peace and utopia. We've seen more violence, more divorces, more communities tore apart. We've got more gun violence and more drug-induced people today than ever before. And you wonder how come I continue to keep speaking in a negative manner about these things. Until I see positive responses, and until I see a movement of people that's willing to accept the responsibilities towards what that they have done out here, I'm going to continue to make video after video after video explaining my story again and again and again. Now you may be asking, okay, so you've got that off your shoulders, right, Dennis? You got that off your shoulders, right, Jibby? I just got part of it off my shoulders. I'm just now beginning, pertaining to certain people that is still hiding either behind their pride or behind their stupidity, that is still sitting back and allowing for this situation. Not in my particular life right now. I'm not talking about me. I'm talking about us. Towards it getting worser and worser and worser. Just like I talked about, it started out with one little flame, and then it got bigger, and then it turned into basically a forest fire. And now the forest fire has turned into something else that basically certain people that was associated with my life in the past 40 plus years have still not given account to. Now you can be like Dennis over there that preaches for the Church of God Church in Kenton, and you can be like him and say, well, Dennis, all that stuff is in behind, man. All that stuff is in the past. Most of those people that you're talking about is already done dead by now. They may be. They may very well be. But that doesn't excuse the fact that it occurred. And it don't stop the fact of me being able to tell my story. What I was going to say a while ago is when we first moved here and we started this project out here towards building this pole barn, I had a lot on my mind at the time. I was on a 8-foot pyramid ladder, and for some reason I decided to step down and thought that I was on the ground of the next step, and instead of me being on the ground, I actually missed my whole step. And by doing so, I fell backwards and I dislocated my left shoulder. I dislocated it. In other words, my left arm was in behind my back. Well, I immediately grabbed my arm and I jerked it back into the socket. One other time my arm got dislocated, my shoulder got dislocated, was back whenever I was in a wheelchair, still getting over the injury of falling off of a 4-story building. I was in Cadillacs at the time, and I said something to Dayton Neuropenic, and Dayton Neuropenic, out of meanness, grabbed hold of my arm and twisted it just right, and once more popped that left shoulder joint out of its joint. I immediately put it back in joint, just like I immediately put the arm for the second time that got out of joint back in joint whenever I fell off the ladder. About 2 weeks after that, this was the first year that I come back here. It may have been the second year. I was going to a Pentecostal church over in Union City that at the time they were just in a smaller building. Now they've built a great big conglomerate building to worship in. It's not the First United Pentecostal people there by the hospital that Brother Cagle preaches in, but it's another group of people that I went up front for prayer, and the next thing you know, they wanted me to lift my hands to pray for me, and as they was praying for me, they pushed me, and whenever they pushed me, they dislocated my left shoulder again for the third time. Excruciating pain went through my body. But I didn't say nothing to nobody because I was trying to hide it pertaining to what that they had done. About a week later, once more, I pulled it back in place without a doctor's help. About a week later, I went back to the church and I tried to explain in what had occurred. And the next thing you know, a whole mob of people, a mob, I'm talking about like 25 people, was pushing me, forcing me out of that particular sanctuary outside. And then they contacted the Union City Police Department that I'm pretty sure it's probably still on file, because at that time I was basically banded from that particular worshiping center there in Union City. It was that information that got to Central Baptist Church pertaining to Randy Brundridge that had no earthly idea in what had occurred, how it occurred, and why it occurred. It was the minister to that church that I tried to give a heads up towards the individual that I allowed to come out here at my particular building that I thought was a Christian in the Lord, and come to find out he was an ex-Hells Angels from out west that was involved in some affairs that I was aware of out in California and also out in Nevada. This individual, once he figured out that I had figured him out, become freaked out. I went back to his house. Once more, he was supposed to have done some computer work for me, and he wound up pulling a long arm on me. A gun, ordered me off his property, and it's 1,000 wonders that he didn't go ahead and try to take a pot shot at me. Because I was concerned about the Christians in Central Baptist Church, I took this information to the pastor. What did the pastor do at that time? He buddied up with Randy Brundridge and the rest of the deacon party over there in Central Baptist Church, because they had heard about a situation that I'd been involved in Union City, Tennessee, with another group of people that once more they have no earthly idea in how come the police was ever called to begin with in that situation. Whenever you have a group of people that's trying to do bodily harm to you, I think I have a right in voicing my opinion towards what that they had done. Now, whether or not they want to get the law involved in that or not, and I guess in a way it's really a good thing in my behalf, because now there's a record of it. There's a record that Dennis Jackson had a confrontation with tongue-talking people in a Pentecostal church in Union City, Tennessee, going towards Hickman, Kentucky, or going on the old road towards Reelfoot Lake. The particular preacher and the preacher's son was from Hickman, Kentucky. I don't know if they're still preaching. I don't know if they're still doing what they're doing, but I'm trying to make reference of the fact of the reason why Randy Brundridge and Central Baptist Church basically gave me the boot is because of hearsay, is because of basically gossip. They only know part of the story and didn't know the whole story. And the fact of the matter is, I was given permission by, I thought, a respectful person that worked for the PDR, not PDR, but public broadcast out of the University of Martin, that had done already helped me make, I think it was either 50 or 100 DVDs that we used their First Baptist equipment on towards going up into the crow's nest and documenting or recording that information on DVDs. And the second time that I went to him at his station that he was at in Martin, UTM, I asked him to help me again. He said, Dennis, I ain't got time to do it, but I tell you what, I'll just go ahead and let you do it, because I know that you're familiar with the equipment and you know how to do it. Just go on into church and go up there and do it. Now, whether or not that individual wants to tell people the truth about him giving me permission to go into First Baptist Church, that'll be up to him. But I can only tell my side of the story, that I was given permission by this individual that's now living in McKenzie, Tennessee. I don't know why he moved. It ain't none of my business. I guess he goes to First Baptist Church up there. But I was given permission by this individual of going up to First Baptist Church. Didn't break in, didn't have to break in. All you got to do is just stand there and wait until somebody's either coming in the door, coming out the door. While the door's open, you go on in. You know, they think that they're secure. They think that because they got this security system in there that they're secure. I got news for you. Anybody can break any security system if that's what they want to do and create malice behavior. If that's truly what they wanted to do. I wasn't trying to commit malice behavior. I was just trying to do work for the Lord towards getting some more DVDs burn off, and it was taking me forever and a day to do it my way, so I knew that they had the proper equipment in First Baptist Church, and I went up there and done it because I was given permission to do it, and because I had been acquainted with doing it before. Once more, it was First Baptist Church in Martin, Tennessee, that basically run me off, but didn't tell me that I was actually banded. But because I was seeing the activities going on with the minister and 2 or 3 deputies there in Martin, Tennessee, because I put 2 and 2 together, I thought, you know what, I'm going to go back to the Martin police station and I'm going to ask them if there was actually a report written up about me pertaining to First Baptist Church. And you know what? Sure enough, there was. So I never would have known authentically that I had been banded from First Baptist Church if I didn't have enough sense to go back to the Martin PD and ask them for the paperwork to see if there was any type of report written up on Dennis James Jackson. So it's not what the Christians are doing, but it's how they are doing it that is underhandedly hurting so many people, just like how the ATF deliberately set up a group of people preying on weak-minded people out in Mount Carmel, Texas, down by Waco, that caused the death and the injury of over 300 plus people, combining event number 1 with event number 2. And that ain't counting the lives that have been affected psychologically, emotionally, as well as physically, that people don't even realize was victims of the loved ones and the friends that wound up going through what they went through. So it's got to stop somewhere. And you know how it stops? Is by people such as myself telling the truth. Telling the whole truth, nothing but the truth, towards exposing these people towards just exactly who they are and what they are. Oh yeah, I'll go ahead and I'll build my other wheelchair ramp. Oh yeah, I'll go ahead and have my operation. And I'll pray to God that I'll be able to heal up and I'll be able to recover from it just like I did on my first operation whenever they fused my right ankle, whenever I initially fell off the building in 1979 in Campbell's Clinic. But I guarantee you there is hundreds, if not thousands of people in Northwest Tennessee that wishes just the very opposite of what I just got through talking about pertaining to my operation. Now, they'll tell you otherwise. They'll tell you, oh, no, we wish you be the best. We wish, oh, really? It's kind of like prayers. Prayers ain't worth a dime if you don't put legs on them and actually activate those prayers. That's what we have seen here in America towards a bunch of two-faced hypocrites, as far as I'm concerned, hypocrisy that has led us down this path of doom and gloom. And to this day, certain individuals have still not been held accountable for what has occurred, not only in my life, but what's happening today in millions of people's lives, not just here in America, but all over the planet. I wanted to make reference to this in the fact that I am in an area right now in the year 2023 that I should not be in. But it's not just me that shouldn't be in this area, but it's millions of other people that shouldn't be here, because we should have already been taken up and rewarded by our Heavenly Father, while the rest of them suffer immensely down here during the Great Tribulation. So whenever I talk, I'm not just talking for myself. I'm not just talking to myself. Whenever I talk and I put out these videos on my YouTube, Facebook platforms, I'm trying to alert the people of the conditions that has occurred and what has put us where we are in possibly being able to reverse this and get us back on the right trajectory. But as of today, this is October, I think it's October the 17th, still no movement, still no validated, authenticated support team or congregation supports the endeavors of the Windmill Ministries missions that come out into the eyes of the general public since 1989. I have spent endless hours, pain, sacrifices, and fought tooth and nail of people that either wanted to declare me as me being insane, or people that changed their alternative motives long about 2005 towards no longer wanting to prove to the public that I was insane, but now wanted to prove to the public that I was a monstrous figure, that I myself was just like Bin Laden or Timothy McVeigh or Nichols or even David Koresh himself, which basically would have been putting me in the same category as Jim Jones. I just wanted to say and make this video today because I've been so hurt, not only physically, emotionally, psychologically, spiritually, by not necessarily my hurts, but by watching everybody else hurt. Everybody else going through what they're going through because of these numbskulls. And that's exactly what they are. And I will tell them that to their faces if they daresomely want to come out here and prove otherwise. I pray for these people. Don't get me wrong. I still love them in the Lord. But what that they have done does not mean that I have to like it. There's nowhere in the Bible where it says, whenever you turn thy cheek, that you have to like it. And I don't like it. And I would be a fool to sit here and tell you that I did. It's just like an animal. Whenever you strike at an animal and that animal yelps, or you hear the cat hiss, they're doing that to illustrate to you that what you just got through doing to them hurts. Don't do it again. If you do, I'm going to growl a little louder.